Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast. And welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
Truth is stranger than fiction. Back in the 90s and into the early 2000s, I used to work for a large defense contractor at the secret military installation in Nevada known colloquially as Area 51. Most of us who worked there simply called it Dreamland. What exactly did we do there? Nothing particularly interesting. I won't say exactly what I did, but I will say I saw a lot. First, you have to understand that the facility's exterior is so secure that about 1/3 of the guards don't know the other 2/3 exist. There are redundant layers of monitoring and surveillance systems that would put Fort Knox to shame. But on the inside, if you have access to the main test labs, you can move around almost anywhere. I've done a lot of exploring, which has gotten me into some trouble, while other times no one seemed to care much. I read something once about Disney World having a vast network of underground tunnels and structures that keep everything on the surface running. It reminded me a lot of Dreamland. It was actually eerie how similar it was. There were a ton of maintenance, facilities, electrical, plumbing, transport, and other personnel with no military background around all the time to do the actual mass production stuff. Mostly they manufactured top-secret materials like radar-absorbing material for stealth planes and missiles. The truth is, Area 51 is nothing more than a chemical manufacturing plant. They do some things like test helicopters and conduct security drills in case of intrusion. They also test other planes, but there's no Aurora plane or aliens or flying saucers or anything like that. We do have the largest repository of palladium ingots in the world. They are stored in some kind of tank filled with mercury or something. It's supposed to be for use in high-tech batteries, but it's actually a money-making scam similar to gold hoarding. The materials produced at Dreamland are pretty amazing. For example, they have to make windows on a stealth bomber that can withstand huge and sudden changes in temperature, pressure, humidity, and radiation from the sun, hundreds of times that also deflect radar waves without interfering with the ability of the pilots to see out of the plane and resist the growth of ice crystals. This isn't an easy material to come across and has to be engineered at the atomic level. I don't know the science behind it. I'm not an engineer, but I know they require massive facilities with huge numbers of people to operate and maintain it to produce a very small quantity of the material, which then has to be quality controlled. Sometimes they accidentally produce a bad batch of 1,000 stealth plane windows and have no way to dispose of them. They can't just put them on the curb for the garbage man to pick up. Instead, there are several methods they use to dispose of unwanted material in bulk. 1. The most obvious is burial. They dig a giant hole in the side of a mountain with explosives, pack up the unwanted material in barrels or crates or whatever, then collapse the entrance. 2. Recycle. Not all materials can be recycled. For example, some of the titanium components manufactured for things like helicopters, if they don't pass quality control, can't be melted down. It costs more to melt them down than it does to just make new ones because supposedly they are designed to be difficult to break down. But I think it's just more money-making scams. 3. Plasma. Some stuff like trash, wood pallets, tampons, etc. would cost too much to bury or recycle, and it's very difficult to compost it, so they put it in some kind of electrical arc furnace and it atomizes the trash into methane. The only thing that's left are little bits of metal and glass which just gets thrown into a pile outside literally by the lake bed. 4. And this is the most controversial one. Fire. According to our contract, if we die at the facility, then we don't get a burial. Our corpses are not permitted to leave the facility for security reasons. My guess is that a spy might try to smuggle something out of the facility in a dead body, so they eliminate that possibility by preventing the dead from leaving. And there have been deaths at Dreamland, about 30 to my knowledge, could be more. Some of them were your typical victims of industrial-type accidents. Crushing injuries, poisoning, electrocution. There was once a helicopter crash, people getting run over by trucks, etc. So what do they do with the body? The policy is to burn them, not in a crematorium. They just put you in a body bag, bring you outside, usually at night, put you on a pile of sandbags, douse you with diesel fuel and light you on fire, until there's nothing left but ashes and the fillings in your teeth. But it's not just people that are disposed of this way, and this is the real reason why Dreamland is top secret. It's because it violates almost every single environmental protection agency law on the books. If at the end of a production run they have a few hundred barrels of some highly toxic chemical that is the waste or byproduct of the material that was manufactured, they won't store it or recycle it. They will just burn it, and you will breathe it in 100 or 1,000 miles away. They don't give a shit. They know it causes cancer and birth defects and neurological disorders and kidney failure, etc., etc., etc. They just don't care, because they are accountable to no one, not even the president, because even the president doesn't know they exist. Now, I'm not an environmentalist, but it's still fucked up. Working at Dreamland is pretty crazy. We get to see a lot of really cool technology that is on the bleeding edge. I guess it might be like working for Google, except there are no windows or beanbag chairs. I see little flying drones buzzing around outside, smart surfaces, various robots doing menial tasks like cleaning toilets and bathrooms. They aren't going to hire a janitor to work minimum wage at a top-secret military test bed. Or making pizzas. They contract a lot of companies outside to build these crazy robots to do all these chores, and they cost millions. They spend billions of dollars to try to keep the number of staff down, but sometimes it's unavoidable. We had an issue with sanitation for a while, so they overhauled a lot of the workspaces and production facilities to be self-cleaning. We also have Roombas and robot floor scrubbers all over the place like it's the Death Star from Star Wars. And again, this was in the early 2000s, before these kinds of things had started to become common. My guess is they have replaced all these custom robots with commercial ones, so they are easier and cheaper to maintain and repair. But I wouldn't be surprised if the higher-ups are still giving out no-bid contracts to their buddies to do all this custom shit that the commercial industry could do for much cheaper. They process all these chemicals for stealth planes, missiles, drones, radars, etc. But they also make drugs too. Yeah, that's right. They make a drug similar to crystal meth to include in a special ration for certain soldiers on certain missions. They take it in the form of a pill, and it keeps them awake and alert for hours without the buzz or the druggy feeling. Supposedly non-addictive, but I don't buy it. Just another hustle. You'll never hear about it because these drugs and their use in the military are also classified. I hate spreading rumors, personally, but I'm pretty close to certain that this shit causes permanent brain damage.
Who runs Area 51 then?
Actually, there's a bunch of general managers who run each department, but the whole place is owned and run by a hidden branch of the US Air Force. All the military really does is keep it secure, but the corporate guys, the scientists, and the blue-collars are all private citizens, but they ultimately answer to a military-style chain of command that overrides their corporate bosses. The contractors all get their orders from the Air Force to build or produce whatever they need. One more thing I wanted to mention before the men in black show up at my door this morning, because it's such an insane hassle to commute out to the Groom Lake facility. First, I drive to a commercial airport and have to park, then walk to a tram stop where these electric carts pick us up and take us directly to the plane on the tarmac. We don't go through the regular terminal. Do a security screening, which for each person takes 2 minutes minimum, and there are only 5 screeners for a plane of 200 passengers and board the plane. Then we wait for all the assholes who need to stand around doing stupid shit with their luggage to sit down. Then we take off and fly for 20 minutes. Then we land at a runway on Groom Lake itself. Then we take a bus from the runway to our respective work area entrances, get security screened again before we enter the foyer. It would take up half of a workday just to get to our actual job. So they have a sort of hotel where we work 3 to 5 days for 8 to 12 hours. It depends on what your department is. Then go home for a few days off, but you are usually on call 24 hours a day. A guy I know once got home only for them to call him within an hour of him being home to come back. And it has happened to him many times. But the pay is obscene, plus benefits and healthcare and all the little perks like the company car, computers, phones, pretty decent cafeteria food, not all the time though, and special tax rebates.
Maybe you have only seen the first levels.
OP here. I don't know what you mean by only seen the first level. There are multiple floors in some of the dugouts and tunnels, but there's no Area 52 inches, which is actually a joke some of the people have talked about at Dreamland. Ghost stories about a Native American burial ground or the hidden hangar that supposedly has a real flying saucer. Of course, that shit spreads around. These are a bunch of science nerds and they watch shit like the X-Files. But no, there's nothing more than a chemical plant and some part production for various aircraft. The only really ultra-secret thing at Dreamland is the security system itself. When I said the 1/3 doesn't know the other 2/3 exists, that's a phrase I overheard one of the private security guys say to a military guy. Maybe I'm mistaken, but I have seen the black bulletproof SUVs that seem to have nothing to do with the desert tan Humvees that patrol the perimeter. They are all separated from each other. The guys in one type of camo don't ever talk to the guys in the other type of camo pattern. Maybe it's a Planet of the Apes situation where they just work for competing contractors, so there is a weirdness between them. Maybe paranoia. Maybe they don't ever get told who the other guys are, and are just told to not ask questions. I just know we aren't allowed to talk to them except in an emergency, and they aren't allowed to talk to us.
A lot of it seems legit. The use of modafinil benzhydryl sulfonyl acetamide, under other trade names also, not to be confused with other eugeroics on Air Force pilots, have been reported since 2011. But other such compounds have been discovered in the late 70s. That's a 36-year gap between discovery of such chemicals and their listed use of trial tests in the Air Force. The involved elaboration of the day-to-day activities, protocols, infrastructure, and corporate negligence lend credibility to the OP's story.
This is a cool and not entirely implausible account, despite the special needs calling you disinfo. Even if it's just a story, it's just a story, not disinfo. What exactly did you do, OP? You mentioned you weren't an engineer. Also, you mentioned that this base is completely secret, but the budget for it has to be somewhere, even though it's probably in a black budget somewhere, and under an assumed name. My point is that an operation this large has to leave some sort of paper trail, no matter how thin. And so I'm wondering if you can help point us in the direction of it. Even so, I'm kind of inclined to think that this is just a story. Either way, it was diverting enough, so thanks.
OP mentioned the men in black getting him. That's stupid, though. If he's disappeared, it lends credence to what he has to say. People that say stuff that should be hidden don't get disappeared because it legitimizes what they say by proving that they were a big enough threat to need to be dealt with. He has no evidence. He's not really a threat. Nothing bad will happen to him. Life will go on, because anything more than that would itself pose a threat to the conspiracy.
This happened a long time ago, but it has always bothered me. I am sure somebody has wondered what happened to this dude. I want to tell the little tiny part of this story in an effort to help solve a possible missing person situation, in case this man had never shown up anywhere again. Just maybe somebody will recognize the very general information I do know about, and that it might help solve a serious event. I am very unclear about the date, and am even not sure of the year. Late or mid-1990s. I am sorry I did not report this somewhere previously. It was unclear where I should go, or who to report such a situation to. It was around 3 p.m. on a Friday, I believe. I was down at the town's motor vehicle department waiting to have an inspection done on a vehicle and then get the tags and title to the auto. I parked beside a dude who was about 45 years old. He was tall, white, pale, had no facial hair, and may have had a receding hairline and light hair. We were both waiting for a long time because it was so busy that day. The dude slowly started to approach me, and he appeared very nervous and was sweating for more than the weather made a reason for. He made it a point to explain a little about his behavior. He told me that he knew it sounded far-fetched, but that he has been running from town to town trying to stay hidden from the government's secret military. I have never in my life been in a conversation with anyone about any similar subject. It made it even more uncomfortable for him to say what he was attempting to say. He said that he felt he finally had lost them, and that he was there to get the vehicle tagged to fit in the state of Arizona and his new fictitious name. He was planning to try to stay here for a while now, and make Casa Grande his home for a few months, but he just had to put this new used car in order, saying that he had been with many vehicles trying to conceal his path if they were following and getting close. He was very nervous telling me this, and I was rather shocked and mostly just listened. I asked him why he was telling me though. He said he was on a mission to break out the truth to the world about UFOs and the fact that they were real and he could prove it. He said that his mission was to tell as many as possible and to prove it to all he could by showing people the evidence he had stolen from Area 51. He asked if I knew of this place, and at that time I had not. So he explained that this is where the government and military try to hide the truth about aliens, and the fact is they are real, and that he wanted me to see his evidence. He stated he stole at least reels of videotape feed all showing information and documentation of actual aliens. He asked if I would like to see them. I was quite stunned at what this guy was saying. I told him I would like to see, but I am afraid to be alone with him under the potential threat of getting caught by some secret society on his heels, and asked if I could bring somebody with me. He had no problem with that and said it would be even better because he would be getting the word out to the two of us. So very strange. I raced to a phone to call my brother and tell him all this stuff, and he insisted on coming with me, though his boss did not like him just leaving work with very little being said. The guy instructed me that he was at this one motel I knew of, and that he was in the first room on the south end, and I knew perfectly where this was. We pulled into the motel, and the dude's car was not pulled up all the way into the parking spot, and the rear passenger door was still open. His motel room door had been kicked in and it was down. I could see the manager of the motel going in the opposite direction from us, and he would not respond to my calling to him. We were out looking around, stunned at all that had taken place, when we saw in the middle of the parking area sat a white new van. The doors were slamming shut, and the driver was in a hurry to leave. The noise coming from the van, like kicking the panels inside, could be heard. The van kicked up rocks speeding away from us. My bro told me to get into his truck, and we quickly left. We hardly spoke a word about it. But like I said at the beginning, this has always bothered me. What happened to him? Is anyone looking for him? Did he survive this ordeal?
My elder brother was an intelligence analyst for the U.S. Army. He, his wife, and another couple went up onto a hill near the base, White Sands Missile Range Army Base, New Mexico, to observe a full moon one night. Just a casual night out. They witnessed an amazing aerial phenomenon with a blazing pink orb, conducting maneuvers that no human craft could do. Both my brother and his friend were experts in the capacities of all aircraft extant at that time in the world. After observing the event for some time, the light suddenly stopped and held a stationary position in the sky. All in the car had the certain feeling that it was noting their observations. Then it seemed to surge toward their position, looming large. All the above was happening around 10 p.m. at night. The next thing they knew, it was 4 a.m. in the morning, and their car was 100 miles east of their base. It was also in the middle of a harvested wheat or barley field. They got out and walked all around the car. There were no car tracks out to their position in the field. It was just sitting there in the middle as if it had been dropped out of the sky. A period of hysteria struck them all, and they fled the scene and just kept going until they intersected the interstate. That was when they realized how far they were from the base. Some days later, agents visited my sister-in-law at her home and also visited the wife of my brother's friend. They did not ask any questions. They just made very ominous threats about not talking about what happened. Some years later, my brother said they had arrived at his offices on base and threatened him. What really rattled him was that no one else in the complex saw them arrive or leave. And this is in a controlled access intelligence area. Even years later, my brother, a hardened Vietnam vet, would start pouring tears when speaking of coming to in the field. My sister-in-law would burst into overt weeping at the mention of the agents. There are deeply conspiratorial undertones to these events and encounters. My brother doesn't show tears for anything. Not pain, not loss. He has the 1,000-yard stare of a combat veteran. A light moving in the sky does not shatter him. Something very deep and profound is going on with these kinds of encounters that assault the mind and being of those who go through them.
I present to you a logical theory on alien abduction and invasion. It can be easily argued against, but I think both sides should be given equal respect and thought simply because it is within the realm of possibility, given the loose evidence we have globally. First is the alien abductions. It is a worldwide phenomenon. Abductees throughout history have come out to share their stories, and the people who hold such claims come from all kinds of background, from intellectuals, officials, farmers. From this we draw that there is no discrimination on which people are abducted, or it shows that they are intentionally diversely abducted. The recollection of the abductions. The vast majority of reports and recollections share the same things. Time loss. In a clinical room, alien beings or unknown beings would experiment on them, take samples from them, often sperm and egg. Then there is a memory wipe, with the abductee only realizing that time was lost. In addition, the children and/or the parents of the abductee also experience this phenomenon at some point in their lives. Women sometimes recall being shown their children. Notes. Again, in the vast majority of cases, the aliens communicate telepathically and immobilize the abductee telepathically as well. What I think could be happening will follow in my next post. I think that humans are being genetically engineered by aliens in order to take over Earth. We don't know the lifespan of such beings if they exist. We are only starting to expand our technology, and we are already experimenting with genetics, finding a cure to aging, and developing technologies which were beyond our imagination 100 years ago. This would reason that an advanced civilization would have an incredibly long lifespan, and technology to alter life forms as well as technology beyond our current understanding. So if such a civilization wanted to conquer a planet, what use would they have to one destroyed by their weapons, or the world destroying itself in an attempt to repel the invaders? What I believe is going on is that we are being transitioned into becoming aliens or alien hybrids over generations, and in due time we would simply become a race or sub-race of aliens, and build an eventual civilization in their image/intent. Our lifespan is incredibly short, so it is reasonable to think that this would be the way they operate. It would be a smooth transition, something we wouldn't acknowledge or really look at. We would advance in technology and humans phased out without any form of resistance, but rather the opposite, great benefit to the invading force.
Modern humans have been around in some form or another for a couple 100,000 years, if you subscribe to the generally accepted theory. That would be an extremely patient way to take over a planet. The only way that could be plausible is if time passed differently for them.
There are plenty of reports of butchered human organs and limbs seen by abductees on craft, Jack Valley Dimensions. Also, Bill Cooper claimed another craft was found sometime after Roswell that had human body parts in it. If they are playing with our genetic code, it means they can probably clone us. If they can abduct, clone, and play mind games with us telepathically, they can probably make near-carbon copies of people, generals, politicians, to infiltrate human society and slowly force the geopolitical field to the point where they can take over the Earth. This is what's happening. There are multiple factions involved. The simplest way to think about it really is demons and angels, God. They're all interdimensional and have separate plans for humanity. The New World Order is real and will be forced on humanity through a very violent public first contact, which the demons or archons will take over under the lie they are protecting us from the other groups. Media pages like Victory of the Light and the Portal Cobra are open disinformation prepping and setting the stage in tandem with Tom DeLonge and his new startup. They are flooding the public sphere with bullshit to confuse and distract the public when it happens.
This did not personally happen to me. For all I know, it could be totally made up, but it was so crazy it just might be real. Back in mid-2011, I was working a temporary job as a data collector at White Sands Missile Range in New Mexico. I am a former military service member, and my qualifications landed me the job. Anyway, my job was fairly simple. I would document technical data on new communications equipment being field tested by the Army's Operational Test Command, OTC. One of the technicians who worked with me was also a field technician for DirecTV or Dish. We would work long hours alongside the OTC staff and became good friends. Working long hours out in the middle of nowhere, storytelling became a good way to kill time. On one particular occasion, he shared a very strange story. He recounted working with the satellite provider out of Deming, New Mexico, a small town west of El Paso, Texas. One day, a call came in about a service installation within his area of responsibility. He was assigned a partner and they both drove out to the property to install the service. The property was a ranch house on the outskirts of the Luna County line, a good driving distance from Deming, New Mexico. When they arrived at the property, they called the owner to inform her that they were at the entrance to her gate. A few minutes later, the owner, an older woman in her 70s or 80s, drove up to open the gate for them. They introduced themselves and proceeded to follow her back to her home. Along the way, he said, he noticed a lot of strange sculptures lining the dirt road. The sculptures were made of sheet metal, aluminum, and wood. He said they looked like huge wind chimes, windmills, and other odd forms. What struck him was the size and complexity. Upon arriving at the house, they got to work. Everything seems normal about the property aside from the sculptures. After an hour or two of working out in the hot New Mexican heat, he and his partner took a break. The old woman came outside and gave them some water and was very friendly. The old woman was very excited about her new service. She told the men her husband had passed away a few years back, and she could use the entertainment since she lived by herself. After installing the dish on the roof, the techs asked permission to enter the house to set up the receiver and run the wires. The old woman was a bit hesitant but agreed to let them in the house. Once inside the home, my friend said both of them became startled. Inside the home were dozens of concrete alien statues. Yes, aliens, greys to be exact. They were lifelike, had limbs, fingers, eyes, and mouths, and he could see wrinkles and scars, too precise to be molds or copies. They were everywhere, in the hallway, in the kitchen. No two were the same. They were different sizes, some taller than others. There was no reason or rhyme to them. Some were staring at the wall, some were in the way, just strange. He remembered thinking, who the hell put all these statues here? Surely the old woman couldn't have done that. Nonetheless, the men got to work and decided to keep their thoughts to themselves. A short time later, the woman broke the ice by talking about the concrete statues. She stated that her husband was an engineer with the U.S. Air Force in Roswell. In mid-1947, an alien craft crashed at a ranch there. She said her husband not only worked at the alien crash site but had proof. He said the old woman shared her late husband's personal photo album. It contained typical photos you would expect to see, wedding pictures and family portraits. But it turned strange when they saw old pictures of alien remains and of the wreckage, almost evidence-like with measurements, CSI-type stuff. He could not believe it. He surely thought this lady was insane or clearly pranking them. The woman went on to explain that government officials and engineers were able to decipher messages and symbols etched into the spaceship. Her husband became obsessed with them. She said her husband, along with others, were able to decipher that the origins of humanity were at the edge of the moon, whatever that meant. She went on to say that was the reason behind the space race with the Soviet Union, that NASA's missions were some sort of cover-up. The real reason Americans went to the moon was to validate the evidence they had found in Roswell, New Mexico. She explained that after her husband retired, he was convinced that the origins of humanity were not at the edge of the moon, but at the edge of Luna County. Luna means moon in Spanish. Her husband and she bought a few acres of land at the edge of the county line, and he continued to search for answers and build those strange sculptures until his death. The old woman said that after her husband passed, she became depressed and very ill and could not continue her husband's work. It was at that time that the Greys started manifesting. At first it was one, then two. Sometimes they would go weeks without appearing, but over the months and eventually years, they started manifesting in the dozens. She used the term manifest, meaning they would just materialize in and out of space and time. She said they were nocturnal beings and hated the daylight. During the night, they would manifest and keep her company, using telepathy to communicate with her. She said they cured her illness and depression and became very fond of her. She would spend long hours at night talking about humanity, our imperfections, and our destructive nature. She went on to explain that because they were nocturnal, during the day they would sleep or hibernate by turning to stone, as a way to protect their bodies from the sunlight. That is why she needed satellite service, because during the day she had nobody to keep her company and she would get bored. My friend remembered experiencing strange feelings of being watched by the statues and experiencing the so-called funhouse effect, becoming disoriented at times. They completed the work and showed the old woman her new satellite service. She was elated. She thanked them for their service, and just like that, it was over. The drive back to Deming was quiet. Who would believe them? Did they see what they thought they did? Was it an elaborate hoax by an old woman? They ended up sharing the story with those who were crazy enough to listen to it. When he shared his story with me, I was dumbfounded. Such a crazy story. Again, not my experience, simply a story that my friend shared with me. Real maybe, I don't know.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more Greentext will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.